You can't hear that? No, it's that mower next door. Oh yeah, every time. Hello world, my name is Matt Spa and I'm a photographer, videographer, and reluctant Subaru owner in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm working on a video right now that compares a couple of Sony lenses, and for that video I need some awesome B-roll and I need a good introductory shot that shows off the glass. I hadn't done a tutorial in a while, so I figured I would chronicle this process and put it out there for your viewing pleasure. In this video I will produce 3 shots. The first one is a simple pan from right to left. Everything's going to be very, very flat, and I want to use that shot to put some text on the screen that compares the specs of each lens. The next shot will have a lot of depth to it. I'll have one lens far away and one close, and I'll pull focus from one to the other. That's going to rely on having good composition on the front end and the back end, and something like that I would use as a section divider between different sections of the video. The last one I'll do is that introduction, and I want it to be kind of a flyover. I'll show you not only how I get the footage, but we'll also walk through the editing process. I'll use speed ramping and probably some selective focus and maybe even some scaling to create a shot that hopefully is dynamic and engaging. For any kind of work like this, you need to have something to put your stuff on, and it can be anything. It can be a bed sheet, it can be a cool rug, or your hardwood floor, or the concrete of your driveway. But there's a couple of things you should keep in mind. One, I like my backgrounds, my set, to have some texture to it. You can shoot it on something completely flat if you want, but I think texture makes something a little bit more fun to look at. You don't want to have so much texture or color or really contrast that whatever's there starts to pull your viewers' attention away from whatever you want them to look at. So texture is good. Too much texture or too much contrast can be bad. I'm going to use a slider when I do these shots just for repeatability, but you could do any of this handheld if you have the skills. If you don't have the skills, by the time you got done doing everything that I'm going to do, you'd be well on your way to acquiring the skills. So not having a slider is not an excuse for not trying to do any of these shots. You need a camera and a lens. Any camera will do as long as you have some manual control. In terms of a lens, I like to use something that's wide and something that has a short minimum focus distance. Wide is going to allow whatever I'm shooting to get bigger as it gets toward the center of the frame. Shallow focus distance is going to allow me to get really close to it. Those two things work together to create dynamic shots. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm using a Zeiss 16-35, and in terms of settings, I'm probably going to be at a focal length of about 18 to maybe 24 or 28 for most of these shots. This is an f4 lens, which isn't super fast, but because we're so close, we still get a shallow depth of field to work with. My shutter speed is going to be 1/120th of a second because I'm shooting at 60 frames per second. If you don't understand the math between shutter speed and frame rate, there's a ton of videos out there that will explain it, probably better than I could here. If you'd like me to explain it, give me a comment down below and I'll be happy to do that. But basically, take whatever your frame rate is, in this case 60 frames, double it, put a 1 over it, and that's your shutter speed. You could do this at 120 frames per second. That's going to give you even more flexibility in the slow motion arena. But 60 frames a second is going to allow me to go almost a third of my actual speed, which for my purposes is going to work just fine. The last thing we need is a light. I have done these with a small softbox before, but I found that the sheen that came across the lenses was so smooth that it made the type kind of hard to read. So I'm actually going to be using a 19-inch ring light. It's a 96-watt light, and it's very inexpensive. Light source is not super crucial here. Where you put it is what really matters. I think that's everything we need to talk about before we start shooting. So let's get shooting. As you can see, I've got everything basically set up for this shot, and setup is the key word here. It's what makes this one a pain, but it's also what makes it work. Ultimately, what I want is something that's really flat and graphic and square to the screen, and so having the substrate be perfectly level in your frame which I don't think I mentioned this in the first segment. My substrate is some weathered wood from Home Depot. They sell this as shiplap. It's rough 3/4 inch pine with some gray stain on it. So it gives me texture, but not a lot of contrast. I digress. Level horizon line on the substrate. The slider, if you're using it, has to be level. The camera needs to run level to that horizon line. If you're doing it handheld, you're probably going to need something to guide your hand. But everything needs to be flat and square. To that end, my lenses are in a very straight line with all of their text coming forward. My backdrop is a piece of black foam core, and I'm controlling the amount of spill that I get on that foam core by how far away it is from the edge of my substrate. Right now, it's about a foot away, and that's giving me a good amount. I can kind of simulate it here. If it was closer, obviously we get more light on the backdrop. If it's out here, we get less. Light placement is roughly even with the backs of the lenses. Looking at my camera settings, I am at f4. I'm shooting at 1/125th of a second. I can't go 120 because my camera doesn't do that, but I'm getting just a little bit faster than the 60 frames per second. If you remember, again, first segment, shutter speed, got it. ISO is at 640 and I am at 28 millimeters. The first thing I need to do with everything in place is roll up here to the center of the composition and then adjust my focus until that text is super crisp. You do not want to do this in autofocus mode, because if you do, your camera's going to be constantly hunting as it goes through the shot. What we want is for things to be out of focus, a little bit of mystery to start with. We get to the middle of the frame, everything's nice and clear, and then when we roll out, they go out of focus again. Everything looks good. If we take a look at our composition and I turn off the house lights, we have something that looks real nice. I've got a nice kind of halo of spill back there on the backdrop. Everything is centered up and looking good. I would like to see a little bit more reflection in the fronts of these lenses. I have a piece of foam core with a hole cut in the middle that will fit over my lens. If I angle it back, you can see I'm getting a lot more fill light across the bottoms. If I take a piece of tape and I just kind of tape this in place like so, what I'm now going to get is fill light that actually travels with my camera. So it's not going to be there at this point. It is going to be there when we hit the middle. And at this point, we're ready to go. I'm going to roll over here to the side. I'm going to hit record on this camera. Start with the lens almost out of frame because it's as far as I can go, and just move very slowly and evenly through the shot. You can see how that reflection is changing over the course of the movement. And once I'm at the other end, I'm going to hold for a couple of seconds. Nice to have that extra footage. And then I'm going to bring this back even slower in the other direction. Normally with something like this, I will do at least a half a dozen passes. You never know when you're going to have a jerky movement in there that's going to make one unusable, or if you want to just adjust your speed ever so slightly. In that one, the camera stayed perpendicular to the horizon line throughout the whole shot. I would like to shoot another one where the camera actually kind of pans across but stays focused on those lenses in the center. So now if I kill the house lights and take a few passes. And again, we're going to come back nice and smooth, even with the horizon, looking good, and back to the center. I'm going to throw in one extra shot here, and I do this a lot because it is super simple and it's easy to just get an extra bit of B-roll footage. You never know when you might need it. With the reflector out of the way, everything's going to stay the same. Nothing's going to move except for the key light. So if I slide the key all the way back, all I'm going to do is hit record and bring my key light forward to do a nice reveal. And that does it for the first shot. We actually got 3 different shots with the same setup. I'm going to reset everything and we'll take a look at that long focus pull. If that first shot was all about flat and graphic, this shot is all about depth. I want this to look like a forest of lenses that we're pulling our viewer's eye from one lens to another. To that end, everything's been rearranged. I have angled my light a little bit to better show off the type that's on the front, and that has meant moving my backdrop further away. That piece of foam core is now about 7 feet away because I want infinite black back there. Interestingly, my settings are identical to the last shoot. My shutter speed is 1/125th, aperture is f4, ISO is 640, and the focal length is even the same at 28 millimeters. In terms of arranging the lenses, what I've had to do is literally just go back and forth from one focus point to another and keep moving things around until I get a composition that I'm pleased with. If you take a look at this, I've got my lens in the foreground right on the rule of thirds line. The lens in the background is just off center a little bit. And I've got a few things that are kind of breaking all of this vertical look. There you go. I've got a lens that's on its side, but is then being obscured, so we're kind of looking down the barrel, but we get something around. I've got a lens hood right here that's just helping to break up those vertical shapes a little bit and give us some interest. The other thing that I've paid attention to do is to obscure the horizon line back there. So in every spot, we have a lens to give more the idea of this infinite space. With all that in place, really all I have to do is, because I have touch focus on this camera, I can touch one logo mark and allow it to focus, and then touch the other and allow it to focus. And that's it. I do want to keep a couple of seconds at the beginning and end. That's a pretty cool looking scene, but everything's fairly even here, and I think there's something we can do to even more so focus our viewer from the back to the front, and that is to change the way this is lit. If I start way back here, even behind that first lens, I'm still focused on this back text, but it's all the way out of the way. Pull it forward till that lights up. Press to focus on the forward lens. And that's it for this second shot. I think in many ways this one's a lot easier than the first shot. Obviously there's no camera movement involved, but getting everything lined up perfectly graphically square in that first shot can be very frustrating. In this one, it's a matter of just moving things back and forth and looking at both compositions until you get something that's pleasing on both ends. If you don't have the capability of touch focus in your camera, of course it's not a big deal. Using your focus ring is always an option. Many modern lenses have the focus by wire feature, which is kind of a bummer. So if you have a manual lens, that can actually make this a whole lot easier. Let me move all this stuff around and set up for the flyover shot, and then we'll do some editing. Here we have the setup for this final shot. I've raised up the slider. It's at an angle. The camera is angled down to give me that flyover move. My settings are a little bit different this time. I'm still at 1/125th of a second, still at f4. ISO has dropped to 320 because the lighting is a little bit closer. And my focal length is now at 22 millimeters. I want to get as much distortion as I can in the shot as I fly over, but I need to adjust it so that my framing ends up the way that I want it to be at the beginning, middle, and end of the shot. Let's take a look at the composition. Here you can see I've got everything arranged in such a way so that the text on both lenses is visible and in focus when we get to the middle of the move. If I were to pull my lighting one way or the other, I get glare against that text. So we're kind of splitting the difference to get it to a point where this is legible when we hit the center point. All the rest of this composition is designed so that my framing is a certain way at the beginning and end of the move. If I move this over here, what I get is just a little teaser. I get the lens hood from the 55 mil. As I move to the shot, we're going to hit focus in the middle. And then when I exit the shot, I want nothing in there except for the wood of the substrate. I don't want to see that other lens hood because I may want to put some text or something like that on this at the end. So with everything in the middle, we're still on manual focus mode. I double check my focus. It looks good. I turn off the house lights. And we're ready to record some footage. So we'll slide to the far end. And this is all, again, about just doing a nice, slow, smooth move all the way through the shot. I'm not super smooth. Fortunately, when you slow this down and speed it up, it can make up for some of those errors. Let's pull this back. Sometimes it's easier to pull a slider than it is to try to push it. And then you can just reverse the footage when you do your final edit. And there you have the final shot. This, just like the other shots that we did, and seemingly all of video editing, is about keeping an eye on the details and then solving problems. All of these shots have a beginning and a middle and an end, and if you pay attention to the details of all of that stuff, you'll end up with really usable footage. At this point, I'm ready to dump this footage and see if what I got is actually usable, and then I'll show you how I edit this last shot. Welcome to Final Cut Pro. I have imported all of my footage and it looks good. I have created a new 1080p 24 frame per second project and I've dumped my first clip into the timeline. I've also added a piece of music called Elysium Short, which is a piece that comes for free in Final Cut Pro. It was a little bit too long, so I've edited out one measure of the music. If I turn my video off, we can listen to it here. So we have 3 measures of music and then a closing chord. Now we want to do something about this footage. It looks terribly overexposed, but that's because I shoot HLG in my Sony camera. So when I bring this into Final Cut Pro, I need to go to Settings, Color Space Override, and set this to Rec 709. When I do that, I have nice flat footage that's ready for a color grade. But first we want to do the speed ramping. With the clip selected, I'm going to press Command R on my keyboard, and that's going to bring up this retime editor. Another way to do that is to go to the clock icon here, press the down arrow, and you'll see all the different options that you have within the retime editor. I need to set some in and out points for the speedy bits of this clip. I want to go over here to where this lens is just starting to enter the frame, and I'm going to hit Shift B. And you can see it's put a little marker there in the retime editor timeline. Then I'm going to roll over until that lens is right almost dead center. Shift B. We're going to roll till this one is in the center. Shift B. And then we're going to wait till that glass is almost out of the frame and Shift B. What we have now are 5 different segments in the retime editor that we can then retime. If I push the down arrow on this second segment, I can change that to 4,000%. I can also do it on this segment where the lenses are moving out, 4,000%. Slide my music edit back over, and let's see what that looks like. I like that, but I want these movements to actually hit on the beats of the music. So let's listen to the music. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. Right there. I want to take and move the music that's hitting right here to be on this time ramp. So if I select them both, I literally can just drag this over until it's in position. Pull this audio down and slide this over. Let's see if that's hitting on the music now. Very close. The problem is we're not going out on the music. You can see the beat right here where it actually needs to be exiting the frame. Let's Shift Z to open this up in the timeline a little bit and take a look at what we've got going on in the retime editor. The green section is running at normal speed. The blue section is what we have sped up to 4,000%, and then the green is back to normal speed. We have our little markers that we set in there. But then we also have these gray boxes, and these gray boxes are the speed ramp, where it's going from 100% to 4,000%. Lots of people like to pull these down really short on the front end, but that's totally subjective. You can try it different ways and see what you like better. But what we need to do is get this speed ramp point aligned with this bit of the music. So if I double click this one, I can say edit, and I get this little film strip icon. All I need to do is drag that over until it is, and put my music back, there we go, until it's lined up with this second bit of music. So let's see if that works. That does work. It's actually just a hair early. Let's pull it back just a bit. And whenever you click one of these, you can edit it. You can make the ramp longer or shorter. Undo that. So now we've got our speed ramp set. We've got mysterious intro. With our speed ramp set, we can look at other ways to enhance this and make it a more engaging shot. We're going to do that by showing the video animations. Control V on your keyboard will show video animation. You can also access this by right-clicking on the timeline and going to Show Video Animation. This is the area where we can make changes to various parameters, and we can edit keyframes. If you're unfamiliar with keyframes, there's a lot of videos out there, and I will probably make one at some point. But basically a keyframe tells your video, I'm going to start making a change here, and then a subsequent keyframe will say this is where whatever that move that I just started ends. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's close this back down. With the retime editor open, I'm going to set a couple of markers. So I'm going to move the playhead to here, press M to put a marker in, and move it over to here and press M. So what I've done now is set markers at the 2 points where my speed ramps are basically centered. Now I can Command R to hide the retime editor, and I can Control V to show the video animation. What I want to do is when these lenses start to hit the center of the frame, I want them to scale up and get a little bit bigger, and then I want it to scale down on the way out. Just before this marker, I'm going to go over here to my transform window, and I'm going to press the keyframe button. You can see the little white dot that's appeared in the video animation line. Then I'm going to move over a little bit, and I'm going to go back to the scale. I don't need to set another keyframe. By making a change right here, which I'm going to up it to 115%, it automatically knows that I've set a new parameter, and you can see it has put a new keyframe on the timeline. I'm going to do the same thing on this side when we go out. This time, I'm just going to set the keyframe to say, this is where my next move is going to begin. Put in another percentage, back to 100, and it automatically inserts the keyframe. Now we need to make some adjustments to our keyframes. The lenses in this clip are moving from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. So we need to adjust these scaling keyframes to make sure that we never interrupt that left to right motion. So let's look at this frame by frame. Cross. It's pretty good. I don't like that one too much. Look at the amount of left to right movement between this frame and these frames. So I'm actually going to pull this over one frame. There. Now all of our scaling, actually, you know what? I'm not liking this last one. Let's pull the last one back one frame. So that scaling is taken apart basically over 2 frames. Let's see what it looks like on the back end. Yep, no good. We're going to pull this way over. Let's back this up one and move this up one. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Very nice. Let me show you what it looks like when you do it wrong. If this is in the wrong place, watch this. You see how that got closer to the camera and then started moving left again? Let's watch it one more time. No good, no good, no good. So by moving this keyframe over to make sure that each frame of the scaling segment is still moving left to right, we get smooth movement. Here we go. Okay, awesome. We've got our scaling in place and we've got our speed ramps set. What else can we do to try to add some drama to this shot? Obviously, we can do a color grade. I'm going to do something very simple here. Bring the highlights up a little bit. Bring the shadows down a little bit just for contrast. For the sake of this tutorial, that's good enough. If you look down here in the video animation, we have a compositing opacity. And if we double click on that, it will open up. And we've got a little slider here. I'm going to take that slider and move it all the way to that first marker. I'm going to go to the other end and take this slider and bring it all the way to that marker. So what that's going to do is change my opacity. I'm going to go from 0% opacity to full opacity. So now we're going to kind of come out of the shadows. Let's watch it again. And we're going to slowly fade out over the course of the rest. I have the detail setting in my Sony camera set at -7. I do not want the camera to add sharpening because I want to do that in post. I get a little bit better quality sharpening, but I also have more control over it. So if we go over here to the effects palette and type in sharp, we see the sharpen. We can drag that right onto our clip. And now we have some sharpening. The default on here is 2.5. I'm going to leave it there for this exercise. Now that we have everything nice and sharp, I actually want to play with the focus on these lenses on the intro and the outro of this. Let's go back over to the effects window, type in focus, and apply a focus effect. Looking at this, we have the option to put in keyframes. What we're going to do is change the amount of focus over the course of the clip. So if I pull this all the way down, it's applying none of this effect. If I take it all the way out here to 100, everything's totally blurred out. So what we want to do is go to the beginning of our clip, set the amount to, let's say, 50, and add a keyframe. Now if we pull to where our scaling begins, we can change this to 0 and it will automatically insert the keyframe. We'll go back over here, insert another keyframe, and then go to the very end of the clip and change this back to 50. Hopefully that makes sense. What we've done, let's hide this and get a better look. What we've done is set a keyframe here for the focus to be out of focus, in focus, and back out of focus. If I add some whooshing sounds to this and titles, you get something that looks like this. I know that's a ton of information. My hat's off to anybody who's hung in this far. It's a lot of small steps, but each one is very logical and each one can be applied or not applied based on how you want your footage to look. And there you have it, 3 B-roll shots to add some visual interest to your content. If you liked it, you know the drill. Thumbs up and subscribe and ring the bell and tell 2 friends, and I'll see you in the next one.